Blessed morning, collective. I don't know what I'm talking about, other than myself, because that's what this is. It's all me talking to myself as well. But ego's absolute addiction to shaming itself. It is an addiction. And even stating that, I can feel there's a shameful quality, right, about that word, about saying that you have an addiction to something. There's this inherent just guilt, this weight as a part of that. But I don't intend that word to be a shameful one. It's more of describing the quality of the relationship that ego has with shame. I want to honor this. It's mine. I apologize. I did just receive a text message that is somewhat related to this, which is interesting. Actually, it's very related. So nothing is coincidence, obviously. First, I'm just feeling it. First, I will just state the feeling of having awoken, of having returned to consciousness in a physical form. Oh no, a fly just came in. No, please go back outside. There we go. Thank you. It did. I'm just gonna shut that. Okay, scattered. I apologize. But fuck, again, nothing is coincidence. It's sort of an intrusion. Intrusive emotion, intrusive thought. This just explosion of anxiety over really nothing. Really nothing. It never really is anything. Even when it is something, it appears to be something, it's still not. It's still not a big deal. Nothing has ever gone wrong. There is only information to be gathered here. Source ain't mad about it. You're still a divine being. All of these things. I am acutely aware of the sensitivity of shame within this being, within this programming, the programming that resides in the ego that is a part of this form. There is just a capacity and a propensity for it. There's so much of this mustn't do energy, which was never directly taught to me as a child. It wasn't. It was picked up secondhand by me through having a much older brother. So my brother is 11 years older than I am. And recalling at a very young age, I was very young, he was a young teenager, right? He was a preteen and a teenager. And walking his own path, he was quite rebellious. Never interested in school, mostly interested in skateboarding and art and being with his friends, being a teenager, those kinds of things. But I picked up this energy, and just from overhearing my parents' dialogue, even at the age where I was still in a crib, that type of thing, I could feel the energy of tension. I could feel their worry about him. And I made a conscious decision at a very early age that clearly I must not do whatever he is doing. There's so much stress, they're so worried and burdened by and whatever about him that I am going to take it upon myself, little baby martyr me, to not do any of the things that he was doing, and specifically do the opposite. If he didn't focus on school, I put all of my effort into school to the point of anxiety about it. If he went out with friends and spent a lot of time doing that and being social, I did the opposite. I spent no time with friends. I never did any sort of sneaking out of the house or staying out late or risky teenager, traditional teenager behavior. I was the quote-unquote model child by my own direction, by my own decision, all because I didn't want to upset them. And I saw how they were upset, and again, we allow ourselves to become upset. Nobody upsets us. Nobody makes us feel anything. We take that upon ourselves just as well by choosing to focus in a way that is not in alignment with our being and so feels unpleasant and is wrapped up in illusion and fear-based thinking, fear-based perception that is upsetting. But little people pleaser Allie said, let me do my best to assuage this pain, to bring peace to this in the only way that I comprehended at that time, which seemed to be action-based, right? These actions are occurring from this individual. The result appears to be the upset of my parents. Let me, in loving and wanting them to feel good, in wanting them to be pleased, let me do the opposite. And if I didn't succeed in doing the opposite, for shame, not from them, from me. I think they would have been shocked and probably, pleased to know that I did some normal socialization, had some of that. It was minimal. I was a sheltered child because I sheltered myself. I stayed in a shell on purpose. And much of my young adulthood and into adulthood has been about emerging from that shell, releasing that burden, releasing the burdens of mustn't, releasing the burdens of judgment, because all judgment of others is just judgment of self. My judgment of another's actions as inappropriate because of the mistaken perception that they caused, they created some reaction in another. No, that's not how it works. That is not. We all choose the way that we feel. Does ego experience a reaction? Yes. Are we forced into following that reaction? No. That's not even us. It's a secondary thing. That's not even truly your emotion when it's ego reacting. It's ego's emotion. And ego lives within this with you. It is within the self. It is a part of the self, but it is not the self. And so we have the conscious choice to witness the reaction of ego and not believe it, to allow it to be, to recognize a thought when it's there and recognize what that thought is based on. Is it based on truth? Does it feel good? Does it feel positive? Does it feel uplifting? Does it feel like less resistance? Those are all things that are based on truth. Does it feel like love, freedom, life, balance, stability? Does it feel like faith? Then we follow that thought. Does it feel like anything other than that? Anything other than that? Sour, angry, small, diminished? Does it feel fearful and afraid and questioning? None of those things are bad. That's information. That's information. That thought is not based on truth. And now you know, oh, disregard that. No need to believe that. And witness how it tries to pull you, because it wants to feed itself, because it has no energy of its own. It needs the energy of your consciousness to continue fueling it, to let it continue being, so it can generate more anxiety and more of that. Put the cat back inside. Which is why the door was open in the first place. Are you coming in? Just curious. Anyway, this is all about judgment. Ego loves to judge itself. It loves to see itself as a problem, right? That just creates more of the ego energy. It is ego that perceives other. It is ego that perceives opposition and says there must be something done about this. Ego wages war. Soul accepts freely. Soul sees no enemy, sees no other, sees no threat, sees that nothing has ever or will or could possibly go wrong, and simply allows and accepts everything. And if there is a situation in which an uncomfortable and negative emotion arises, it just takes the information from that. It takes the bounce of the contrast. That's it. That's it. It's that simple. So, what am I speaking on? Because I have a desire to be vulnerable, because that is my choice, and it is a large part of my intent with this channel as well. In removing those layers, peeling off the layers of judgment of self, shame, all of this. So my desire is not to put ego on blast or myself on blast. It's to have an open, honest, frank, and non-judgmental discussion about situations and emotions that arise. Because here we are in this life experience. We are eternal life. We are divine beings, divine delivered creators, spirit, manifest, incarnate. And all of life is the self-expressing. All of life is divine. All of it is sacred. And so it is my intention and desire to show myself, to demonstrate for myself, because no action that is not taken for the self can be one that benefits collective. And truly, I am the only one experiencing myself. I am the only one living as this self. And so it is up to me to embody and be my own role model, to be my inner being, and demonstrate for myself love, acceptance, appreciation, the truth of my being. And I am on a spiritual journey, as all of us are, every single one, whether or not we are consciously aware of or characterize it in that way. All of this is a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings. There's no being removed from that. And so I desire to expand and be truly inclusive of all aspects of this life experience, in witnessing them all as spiritual in nature, all as having something to fulfill and enrich us with in some way, excluding nothing, leaving nothing out, judging nothing as unworthy or unacceptable or inappropriate as a part of this experience. That is my desire. And so it is easy for ego to judge something like drinking. It's a fine line, yes. Because it is an activity that can quite easily drive one into a state of unconsciousness by the nature of it. It is something that takes presence and awareness to engage with, but I believe that is possible. Sorry, I'm being kneaded on bearskin. Not trying to feel like I'm getting a tattoo right now. But it is also something we have this tremendous shame about, and shame just continues to drive the unconsciousness. The shame itself is an unconscious behavior. It's a fear-based behavior. And in the covering of the shame, there is this tendency in much of society to drink more, to cover the shame. I desire to remove that barrier by shining the light of consciousness upon the state of intoxication, by bringing that there. Certainly, again, there's a fine line. There is that point, and that's what the consciousness really is about. That's what the presence is about, is maintaining that sense of self-awareness that is aware of the changes taking place, the changes in perception, the changes in motor ability, and not judging them, but making aware, conscious decisions from that point. I believe all of life is here, again, to enrich and fulfill us, and to provide an opportunity to connect with the spirit that we are. All of it. And I am witnessing simultaneously the judgment of ego. Ego's belief to the contrary. which immediately creates this sour sensation right here, right in the diaphragm, solar plexus. And so immediately is an indication that ego's belief to the contrary is false, is not supported, and that's okay. That's great information to have. I believe in the practice of presence in everything. Everything. It is my specific desire and intention to bring the light of presence into the furthest reaches of this experience, to the dimmest, darkest corners of shadow, of ego. To toe the line, to find the balance between that place of unconsciousness, breaching into unaware, unconscious, ego-driven action, and presence informed, presence grounded, but unafraid, unlimited, flexible. Anywhere there is rigidity, that is of ego. When there is a mustn't, when there is a this shall not be, this cannot be, this should not be, that is all of ego. And so I desire to soften all of those imperatives, those commands, by introducing the flexible, truly flexible, all allowing unconditional nature of presence into especially these arenas and the activities that relate to them. I'm just feeling the energy now. So yes, I had some drinks last night. We'll put it that way. To the point of losing consciousness. I mean, not physical consciousness, because you lose consciousness long before that point. To the point of losing presence. I did not feel so. In fact, I felt very much the same internally at the end of the night as I did at the beginning. Very much the same. There was an awareness of the change, certainly. An awareness of the change in the feeling of the body and the movement of the body. A greater emphasis on refocusing. I did notice how in some ways it became easier to lose track of the awareness, certainly. But not in a way that made it impossible to do so, and not in a way that was very much unlike anything I had experienced in the midst of anxiety, in the midst of other fully sober states where ego was just acting up. And so ultimately, I have this sense of pride over having engaged, having honored an activity. It was a celebration also. It was a good time. It was not a covering up of negative emotions, not for me, at least. There were perhaps other individuals involved having that experience, and that is something to recognize as well, but not to judge. Not to judge. I can feel that though, and that's a part of this too, is sensing the collective self-judgment. But all of it is information. The judgment is an unnecessary component. If you have the awareness of, oh, I do not feel so good about this decision, that I made, then, well, briefly examine why. Is there truly something about it? Did you act in some wild way? Did you lose consciousness? Did you disengage from presence? Then you don't need to feel bad. That's just information. Now I have this experience. I have completed this experiment. Look at all of it, because all of this is an experiment. That was an experiment. The experiment, the result, the data that we gathered indicated a loss of presence. So now we just take this data moving forward and we make a new decision. Do we want to engage up to that point where we lose presence again? Now we know, perhaps not. Okay, good to know. Good to know. Nothing went wrong. In fact, it all went right. Experiment success. Data gathered, it's good data. That's always the way life is. Every experiment provides some form of clarity. All of this is an experiment. Get creative with it. Don't be so rigid. Be flexible. Allow yourself to experience things. When you experience a thing that you go, maybe don't want to experience that again, just acknowledge that purely. It's not because of a judgment of self. It's not because of source judging you. Source is not making you feel this way. Source is not shaming you. It's the shame of ego, which in actuality feels so bad because it's diverged from the perspective of source. Source is not feeling bad about it. Source is not regretting it. Source is not any of those things. Source is appreciative for the experience of contrast and the adding of clarity to the knowledge of itself and what it desires. The very bad feeling of shame is the result and the indication of the separation from alignment with the perspective of source, of spirit, of all that is, which sees nothing as having gone wrong and nothing to feel bad about. Again, just data, just gathered data. So I can witness for myself the gathering of some data, but there perhaps a little bit too much consumed. Yes, more than was necessary, more than I really wanted. More than I really wanted, that's what it is. Because of a few brief moments of not so present decisions, right? Yes, and I can acknowledge to that and not feel any shame around it. In fact, it feels good. It's empowering to just look at that and say, yes, now I have this information moving forward. I feel I can make more empowered, informed decisions. Now, I can engage in a fresh way, in a way that is even more present moving forward. No shame required. Shame is not the fuel here. Shame has nothing to add here. That's just this unnecessary additional layer of ego. And it's just based on programming. It's just old patterns that we picked up from people who picked them up from other people. It's just, that's all it is. And it's time to release those things. And the way that we release them is not by resisting them, not by fighting them, not by saying they're wrong, not by shaming them. You can't shame out of existence. It's not how it works. It builds it up more. The answer is to bring the light of awareness and acceptance to them. Non-judgment, neutrality, just being. And so witnessing when the feeling of shame arises and understanding what it is. It's just a fragment of ego. And it's okay. It doesn't have to go away. We just also have the awareness that it's not a thing we need to believe. If anything, it gives us the information of the truth of the opposite. And that's beneficial. And then we can be grateful for shame, for showing us the truth of pride, of self-assurance, of self-love, of self-awareness. That's the truth that shame is pointing to with its bad feeling. And it only ever does. It only ever can. And so thank you, shame, for serving us in this way by demonstrating the falsehood of this feeling, the falseness of the foundation, by the very feeling of it. Now we can find the true foundation, the true truth, the true perspective. We can pivot and align with that. And so it is an unnecessary additional component, but it still serves. It still has information, it still has data to feed us. And so it's still beneficial. Nothing wrong. Again, nothing has gone wrong, could go wrong. I do believe we are moving into the time where shame can be released. We are releasing fear, we are releasing suffering. These things have served us in the ways that they can, which again is to point in the opposite direction of them. They are primarily just these additional excess components. We have data. It's good data. We've gathered it. We're gaining more and more clarity. We are refining our experience of the contrast and ability to take the information and take the leap from it. And that means we don't need so much of this other stuff. We can let it go. We can just release the shame and understand the way that happens is by holding it in awareness, is not by pushing it away, is not by shaming it, is by recognizing it for what it is, which is an artifact of ego, which is old programming, which is based on a misperception, a misunderstanding of existence, of the self, a misidentification. And it had to be that way so that we could reach this place of clarity, of correct identification, of understanding the self. All of it has served, and it's come to the end of its cycle. It's come to the end of its service. It's ready to be dismissed, to be put out to pasture, to be relieved of duty, so that it can transmute and transform, so that energy can be released, returned to the source which it comes from, so that shadow can return to being light, so that it doesn't have to play the enemy anymore, it doesn't have to play the adversary anymore. It no longer needs to reprise that role. It has served and provided tremendous benefit in its service. And we are deeply appreciative of that. And now it's time for it to come home, to serve in a new way, to serve by rediscovering the truth of itself, becoming conscious of itself, of its divine origin, and releasing, ascending, lifting. And now we all move forward hand in hand together in awareness as deliberate creators, conscious in what we're doing, conscious in our creation, purposeful and awake, and without a shred of judgment. I still feel it here, but it says, that sounds nice. I think I might like that. I think maybe I could do that. I think I could love. I would like to love myself now. That sounds good. Oh, that's more than enough. That's more than enough. The desire is all it takes there. And with the awareness, we open the space for belief to flow in. The space for faith. The space of allowance, of allowing for the possibility of this thing. I would like to love myself. Holding that in awareness. Holding that in allowance. The frequency of allowance generates the allowance of loving the self. Gives ego the chance to love itself. By us just witnessing it, holding it in unconditional acceptance, which is love, which is what we are, truly. I think I'm going to leave that there. There's some other stuff I'd like to pull on, and I'm going to do that later today. The aspects right now are intense. They're tense. And ego is feeling it. It's taking the hit, and it wants the relief. It wants to love itself. We can do that. We can do that. That's a big part of what we're here to do, is be present with it, and in the state of witnessing ego and holding it in the gaze of unconditionality, of acceptance, of allowance, of non-judgment. That is love. That's what love is. That freedom to be as you be, and appreciating that being for being. That's love. That's what you are. When we hold ego in that space, we create the space for it to change itself, to transmute, to not really be changed, but uplifted, modified, evolved, the ascended version of itself, to sublime. That's all I got. Yeah, I'm leaving it there. And I still feel it here. And you know what? That's okay. It's allowed. It is allowed. It is well. If anything, it points to the truth of the well-being of all things. I can find that place in my perspective. I can hold that frequency. That's it. Have a blessed, beautiful day. Thank you for being, and be easy on yourself.